Let us welcome with a round of applause the featured speaker of this evening, the Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of Saint Vincent and the Grenadines.
Comrade Chairperson, Cabinet, colleagues and former ministers, our new ambassador or friend from Cuba, Pepe, and Tatiana, welcome. This is your first public event. And then, of course, our dear friend Francisco and his wife, and all specially invited guests. I just want to say, put on record that our dear friend, our immediate past Cuban ambassador and her husband, they served us very, very well for 4 years, and we thank them very much for their service. I had a farewell event for them at Goss, where I live in the countryside. And it was a wonderful event, Just as a matter of telling you how fortunate we are to have Pepe. Pepe is a very good friend of the president. Our dear comrade Miguel, president of Cuba, and they knew each other since they were going to school. So we have somebody who is very close to the president. But even more important than that, because men can have the relationship, but the real links come from the fact that Tatiana is the best friend of the wife of the president. We are very pleased to have them, as much as we have been sorry to see our dear comrades leave us. I want to talk today about Venezuela and Cuba and Bolivia and Dominica and the threat which looms also for Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. I want to begin by reaffirming that the central contradiction in our hemisphere, indeed in the world, is between those countries and their ruling classes who are desirous of exercising hegemony over other countries in the interest of the ruling classes of monopoly capitalism, taken overseas as imperialism and the political project of neoliberalism. The central contradiction is between the ruling class of powerful countries with monopoly capitalism overseas and the countries whom they desire to exercise hegemony over, control and domination, and to take their resources in the interests of the dominant economic and political classes of the monopoly capitalist countries. That's a central contradiction. It is far more important contradiction as between the antagonisms between different groups within Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, within Dominica, within Venezuela, within Cuba, or any of these countries which neoliberalism wants to dominate. It means, therefore, that anyone, any group, any set of forces who side, objectively speaking, with imperialism and who seek to divide the popular movement are an enemy of the people. Let us not mince words, because that is what is before us. A new phase has been entered into in this very complicated world. New nation. In it, they are seeking to use every single weapon, not only military intervention, but they're weaponizing trade, they're weaponizing the banking system, they're weaponizing the financial system, and they're seeking to use pliable institutions such as the Organization of American States to help them carry out their quest for domination. This quest is being led currently by what I would simply call the scum of the global ruling class. And they are in a dangerous phase, and they're a dangerous group because they have absolutely no intention to follow any rules, to follow any order. They're not interested in the truth. They're interested in disinformation, control of the world information system, and to see if they could control the minds of people in this quest for domination and the taking of countries' resources. Now, in the process, this scum of the global ruling class form alliances with similar bandits and robbers across the world, and form alliances too with opportunists and those who are interested only in power for themselves or accommodation without protest to imperialism, in other words, subservience and submission. Some of them would use progressive language, but if objectively they side with imperialism, the coincidence of that siding is what is the objective fact, not any mountains to the contrary. No. They have no regard for international law. They have no regard for sovereignty. They have no regard to a country's independence. In the case of Cuba, there's a long-standing attempt to bring Cuba to heel. And the heroic Cuban people have had to fight since 1959 to maintain their independence and sovereignty and to pursue a path which they have decided to carry for themselves. Venezuela has sought to pursue its own path, and because it collides with the interests of imperialism, imperialism, have shown no compunction in intervening shamelessly in Venezuela's internal affairs, contrary to international law. They stir up violence, they seize property and money belonging to the Venezuelan state, and as I've said before, they utilize the OAS and some pliable leaders within it to do their bidding. Recently, we noticed in Bolivia what has happened, and it is important that we see what is taking place in Bolivia. And I authorized, not that he needed authorization, the Minister of Finance, Camilo, to do a posting called Dominica, the OAS and Regime Change Agenda. Post it on his blog. And he begins with a quotation from Fidel in 1962. The OAS was unmasked for what it is: Yankee Ministry of Colonies and a military bloc against the peoples of Latin America. In the case of Bolivia, against which government a coup was carried out, a coup by election observer. You never hear about such a coup, eh? A coup by election observer. I'm wondering if you all realize what is happening in this world and in this hemisphere under the leadership of the scum of the global ruling class. In Bolivia, there was a democratically elected president who was to serve, Evo Morales, until January the 21st, 2020. In that country, electoral authorities have an unofficial quick count that gives the general public updates on the counting of ballots. It is a system that was implemented with the help of the OAS. On election night, with about 84% of the ballots counted, the Bolivian electoral authorities held a press conference to update the public on its quick count numbers. At the time, Evo Morales was ahead with 45.7% of the vote, while his opponent had a 37.8%. Under Bolivian law, you must have at least 40% of the vote and lead your opponent by 10 clear percentage points to win the election in the first round of the balloting. With 84% of the votes counted, Evo was facing the possibility of a second ballot, because 45.7% for him, 37.8% for his opponent. A second ballot would have made Evo more vulnerable, since the defeated opposition parties could pool their votes against him. Evo was, however, still confident of victory in the first round of voting, because the ballots from the indigenous mountain villages had not yet come in, and those villages have tended to support him strongly. After the press conference, the Electoral Commission stopped reporting quick count numbers. Ordinarily, this would not be surprising. That's how they did it in the past, and you can check the website. And that's what they had announced that they were going to do beforehand. And you can also check the website. In other words, what the electoral authorities did in Bolivia is nothing, no subterfuge. But the OAS saw an opportunity and they pounced. First, they expressed alarm that the quick count had stopped and demanded that it restart. When it was restarted, 95% of the votes were counted. And the results from some more rural villages had pushed Evo to 46.9% to 36.7% over his main rival, enough to win in the first round. Before all the votes were counted, the OAS had already released a communique voicing concern about, quote, the inexplicable change in trend in the quick count. In truth, there was no change in the trend. A recent study by the Center for Economic and Policy Research, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank, shows that the vote count was perfectly in order with the trends indicated by the earlier quick count, which had tallied the opposition-friendly cities before the Evo back in rural communities. As you know, a lot of indigenous people live in the countryside and they support Evo more than the parties, for instance, which are based in Santa Cruz, the Castilian Spanish and their descendants. But the damage was done. The opposition, seizing on the OAS communique, mobilized its supporters to the streets and began rioting. The OAS and its Secretary General, Luis Almagro, continued its destabilizing commentary, egging them on. The situation on the ground began to spiral out of control. Evo Morales, still trusting in the legitimacy of his victory, agreed to an OAS offer to audit the results. He was quite confident. The OAS predictably listed a series of failings of the system. Well, every election everywhere in the world has vulnerabilities or failings on election day. But that doesn't mean that the election is not free and fair. You remember about pregnant chads and hanging chads in Florida, where it was decided at the US Supreme Court and they voted 5-4 straight along party lines in accordance who appointed the 9 Supreme Court judges and gave George Bush the presidency over Al Gore. See what happened recently in Georgia? And the OAS reiterated their assertion that Evo's late surge was inexplicable. It was not inexplicable, perfectly explainable. The die was cast. Evo suggested free elections, predicting an even bigger victory. His military, however, suggested otherwise, deposed him, and sent him into exile. A coup initiated by election observer. You over what is happening? You understand what is taking place in Dominica? A member country of Alba? And as you are aware, Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, of all the countries in the Caribbean, has been the most steadfast in defending Cuba, in defending Venezuela, and in defending Evo Morales of Bolivia. Recently at the OAS, they brought a milk and water resolution. Several countries in the Caribbean abstained. Some voted for the resolution. 3 countries voted against it: Mexico, Nicaragua, and Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. If it were only Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, we alone would have stood up, because we know what is happening. Now, in several other encounters, we have seen the hand of Almagro. And I want to make this plain. I have no problem with him personally. The other day, an envoy came from the OAS, came to me, said that Almagro asked him to give greetings to Comrade Ralph. Apparently, he feels very moved by the fact that at the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in St. Lucia in July, he was in the audience where he had officials, and apparently I didn't know it until I was told so by this envoy, that all the heads of government who came down, they passed Morales, they passed Almagro as if he was an easy exam. They didn't tell him they didn't tell him morning, evening, they didn't tell him nothing. I stopped by him. I said, "My brother Almagro, how are you doing? How are things?" I shook his hand, we exchanged pleasantries. My mother brought me up to have manners. But don't fool her, don't think that my manners is one thing. My politics is an entirely different story. Now, we go now to Dominica. By the way, just want something which you don't hear about on the news. A woman declared herself president, a conservative woman in Bolivia, with the support of the military, and then issued a decree saying that the armed forces are immune from any criminal prosecution for anything they do in dealing with disorder. Morales people were protesting. They shot 9 indigenous people and killed them. Immunity. You understand, when I started my speech, some of you must be saying, Ralph sounding like a man from the 1960s. No, I'm the Prime Minister of Saint Vincent and the Grenadines in the year 2019, and I'm watching the hemisphere, not through rose-tinted spectacles, but I'm looking at it in real terms. And I just add this. I know when I speak like this, people say, well, are you fearful? Fearful about what? I'm 73 and a half years old. The average lifespan of a Vincentian male is 75. So the worst you can do to me is to accelerate my demise. And I've lived a lot of years already. So it doesn't really, it doesn't matter to me anything whatsoever in that regard. So I just make that point. So if you all see and hear a lot of things and you see that I ain't taking them on, it's because I'm keeping my focus. I'm keeping my focus. Now, let's come to Dominica. On February the 7th this year, Caribbean diplomats were stunned to see a tweet from Luis Almagro implying that the next elections in Dominica might not be free and fair. Almagro's tweet was stunning for multiple reasons. You know what he said in his tweet? Today, I met with former ambassador to the United Nations, Crispin Gregoire, who expresses concern that the upcoming elections in Dominica are not free and fair. He also requested the OAS official assistance to help ensure a level playing field in the country. That's his tweet. That is February this year. You hear what I'm telling you? February 2019. The elections are now in December, and it could have gone into the early part next year. The first thing to note is that the elections in Dominica were previously held on the 8th of December 2014, and they were not constitutionally due until the 8th of March next year, a date 13 months beyond Almagro's tweet. The far more pressing concern of the OAS should have been what happened in Dominica 17 months before Almagro's tweet. What happened in 17 months before? The devastation wrought by Hurricane Maria and the island's continued struggle to recover. That's not their concern. Second, Dominica had historically enjoyed peaceful and democratic transfers of power, and there was no suggestion that the next election, whose date would not even be announced for another 10 months, would be any different. Yet, here was a smiling Almagro, shaking hands with Crispin Gregoire, a former Dominican ambassador and disgruntled former member of the old guard of the Dominica Labour Party, whose own carefully planned political ascent was derailed by the sudden rise of Roosevelt Skerritt. There was the head of a major hemispheric body recklessly raising the issue of electoral fraud to his 1.3 million Twitter followers without a scintilla of evidence beyond the usual baseless fear-mongering and paranoia that seem to accompany every election these days. CARICOM reacted strongly, even angrily, to Almagro's tweet, issuing a statement which said, quote, that it was deeply concerned by the actions and statements of the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, which are outside the bounds of his remit as the head of an international organization, unquote. The CARICOM statement branded the tweet as, quote, the latest manifestation of Almagro's inappropriate behavior, unquote. And CARICOM demanded that the Secretary General, quote, refrain from actions and statements which are beyond the competence of the office and affect the impartiality of the organization, unquote. But Almagro wasn't affected at all by this. He doubled down, suggesting that Dominica isn't sufficiently compliant with the OAS electoral recommendations, and stating that, quote, when OAS recommendations are not followed and not implemented, this does not help member states to increase the level of trust from the opposition and the international community in their electoral processes. Just like that, 10 months before the eventual Dominica election date, the OAS unambiguously signaled its intent to revisit and revive its shameful pattern of interference and intervention in the electoral affairs of any member state that does not pass its ideological litmus test, that does not side with imperialism. That's what you're having before you. And if you don't believe any of that, and if you're not persuaded by any of that, tell me and let me just get on, let me walk out and go and spend time somewhere else, because this is a serious business, a very serious business. Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, shameless, Dominica is Saint Vincent and Grenadines, next in line. You hear what I'm telling you? You better believe that. Understand what is happening. If you want to be slaves in your country to American imperialism and the opportunists who ally with them, you can go ahead and be slaves to them, not I. Not this man. All what I'm saying here, I fully expect all of this would be reported elsewhere now. I fully expect too that the internet crazies and those employed, either by the opportunists or by the imperialists themselves, they will want to slaughter me on social media. The point of it, that doesn't trouble me because it's not going to stop me from speaking the truth, especially since you understand what I'm talking about. That's the important thing. I want you to get that clear. Now, what is happening, you can go in any library and whole sections would tell you about US intervention historically in seeking to undermine free and fair elections and try to take popular governments out of power. Popular meaning those which are resisting, even some small way, US hegemony. So we come back to Dominica. Almagro's photo up with Crispin Gregoire was a calculated opening salvo to legitimize and elevate the seasonal loose talk about electoral fraud to the forefront of their Dominicans' minds. When predictably, a small minority of opposition supporters spent a night engaging in low-level pre-election vandalism and civil disobedience in Dominica's capital, Almagro was quick to fire off another inflammatory tweet. You know what? The opposition, they had a meeting in Roseau. So about 8:30 the night, a few dozen of them decided they're going to go to the president's residence. The president is the equivalent of the governor general. If you know where the president lives, it's a compound with big iron fence. You want to have a discussion with the president, a mob will turn up at the gates, so the security say, no, you can't come. What they then do, they go in little pockets. Roseau is a small town, in 4 or 5 places, they gather some garbage and light fire. The police, in maintaining order, fired rubber bullets. Nobody was hurt, nobody was injured, order was restored. But that was enough for Almagro to go and tweet again. Quote, "The people of Dominica deserve democratic, fair, and inclusive and transparent elections. Democracy is the best antidote against violence. An OS observation mission would be essential to provide assurance and suggest improvements to the system." And right on cue, an American diplomat addressed the Organization of American States to complain, 1, that the Dominican Prime Minister called elections early. It's not early, it's almost 5 years to the day. After the 2014 elections, the 2014 elections was on December the 8th. The elections this year is on December the 6th. How you call it early? In any case, Skerrit is entitled under the Constitution as Prime Minister to call it what he wants. Secondly, he said that Dominica doesn't have a voter ID card. America doesn't have one either, and America is a much bigger place than Dominica. Dominica, 35,000 people voting, everybody know everybody in every village. What are they talking about? It's a good thing to have a national ID card like what we have here. In America, you go, they ask you for your driver's license, which has a picture, you show them. But a lot of people don't remember to walk with a driver's license. They say, well, are you Ralph? Yeah, here's my credit card from Visa. They say, you don't have another piece? Here's my social security card. They don't got a picture ID on them. A man could have just picked it up out of the car where I leave it in my wallet. What are they talking about? And he said that the OS, the American diplomats at the OS said that OS observer missions are the gold standard in ensuring free and fair elections, and therefore should be allowed to observe Dominica elections. America never invite the OS. You know, in England, you don't have any ID card either, you know. In Dominica, you dip your finger in the ink, even though there's no ID card. Just like how we have ID card and dip our finger in the ink. In England, in Britain, they will consider it third world for English people to dip the finger in ink. We must educate ourselves, you know. I'm warning everybody in Saint Vincent early. You know, fortunately, the foreign minister of Dominica refuted the American allegations in her own statement to the OS and detailed her prime minister's numerous attempts to clean up the voters list and implement electoral reforms, often over opposition objections, but that scarcely mattered. Both the OAS and the USA, the narrative of Dominica election fraud has been established. And then on top of that, Al Jazeera. And it's easy to Google Dominica, elections, fraud, corruption. You see the narrative? Eh? They may twist it here and there as the circumstances admit. But they intend for a government which has supported Venezuela and Cuba and Bolivia, even though not upfront and with the unbreakable determination of the ULP government, they still want it out. They want a regime in Dominica which is pliable. Just like in Saint Vincent, they want one which is pliable to do the wishes of the Master. Well, the only wishes I do is of the Master, the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. Now, what are we going to do? Yesterday afternoon, I wrote a letter to every single head of government in CARICOM. The United States of America has sent a letter to all of us in the hemisphere, said to support Almagro to be re-elected. The candidates have to be presented by the 15th of December, and the election takes place March next year. I have written a letter to all our colleagues. There are 3 candidates who have declared. Almagro, the ambassador from Peru to the United States of America, and an Ecuadorian former minister under the government of Rafael Correa, and also immediate past President of the United Nations General Assembly, whom we know well, Maria Fernanda Espinosa. And I'm calling on all CARICOM countries. If all 14 of us vote for Maria Fernanda Espinosa, Almagro cannot be re-elected. Because that would be 14 votes, and in the rest of Latin America, we will get more than 4 votes. And it's 18 we need to stop Almagro from continuing this foolishness in seeking to interfere in elections. if nobody wants to take the lead to stop him, where he's doing the bidding of imperialism, Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, the land of Chateaubriand, that we will take the lead in doing it. When the British came here in 1763, as a result of the Treaty of Paris, between themselves and the French, the Kalinago and the Garifuna didn't invite them. And for nearly 40 years, there was resistance. 40 years before they can properly establish a state, before the British can properly consolidate their colonial state. The Garifuna and the Kalinago were defeated by superior arms. And they didn't have many friends externally. And I remind everybody, the only country in the entire Caribbean where the indigenous people resisted colonialism for such a prolonged period of time, including an ongoing guerrilla war, Grenadines. No other country in the Caribbean. In Haiti, it was the slaves who established the revolution. And in Cuba, it was Fidel and the July the 26th movement in 1959. In 1959, which Chase Batista, who was a collaborator with imperialism and hooliganism. We are small. It is this country which stood up at the OAS and fought against the attempts by Almagro and other people to intervene militarily, to give a fig leaf of support. When the Americans asked me, how could you say that President Trump wanted to intervene militarily in Venezuela? Where's the evidence for it? The evidence for it is I saw him on television. I heard him say that all options are on the table. And when the journalist asked him, all options mean military intervention? He said, yes, the military intervention in Venezuela option is on the table. You don't want me to take seriously what the President of the United States says? I'm taking seriously what he says. He might have been bluffing, but what is joke for Falcock is dead for Crapo. So I ain't taking that as no joke. I'm taking it what it is said. I'm not getting involved in American politics, you know. I'm seeking to protect the interests of the people of the region, of the hemisphere, and especially in this case, in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Bolivia, and now in Dominica, which goes to the polls on Friday. Let us see whether the people of Dominica are going to give in to this orchestrated attack on a progressive anti-imperialist government which is functioning in the interest of the poor and the working people. I'm not making a claim that the Labour Party government in Dominica is perfect. Far from that. Perfection is only when we go to Beulah land, when we go on the other side of eternity, when we come face to face with our Lord and Savior. That's when we'll arrive at perfection. Here, we do the best we can within the interests of our people. I want to congratulate Venezuela and the work they're doing in teaching Spanish at all the various levels here. the Cultural and Linguistic Gala. I want to thank Venezuela for all the international solidarity they delivered to people in the Caribbean and in the hemisphere. I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart and what they've done for Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. I point out to my American friends that what they're doing to Venezuela with the embargo, what they're doing with weaponizing trade and the banking system affecting us. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we will make $35 million from trading on Petrocaribe annually. Essentially a soft loan for 25 years at 1%. There's one or two things I have to do to make up for that money. I either have to cut back on programs for the people, or I have to go elsewhere and borrow the money at higher rates of interest, bringing an extra burden on the people of the country. What the United States of America has done in sanctioning Venezuela affect the poor and the working people and the nation as a whole in Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. And now we see a kind of a conspiratorial link-up between certain functionaries of the American state and Almagro, who incidentally was given support by the progressive movement because President Pepe in Uruguay had recommended him, and he was highly regarded. The United States of America and Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, we have excellent relations. Our people go there and work. Our people study there. Our tourists come from there. It's a great country, no doubt about it. And we are located geographically. I can't take Saint Vincent and the Grenadines and lift it up and carry it to Vladivostok or at the gates of Beijing. I can't do that. What I want is a genuine friendship between all peoples. Let's live in peace and work within the framework of international law. I'm not complaining about anything which is done in the United States by the United States government. That is not my business. What is my business is for any interference which is taking place in other countries in the hemisphere, and they want to dismantle the progressive movement which represents the best hope for our peoples. Now, clearly, Saint Vincent and the Grenadines has no interest in picking any fight with America. But I have to speak honestly, because if I don't speak it, they're going to do what they want to do in any event. I have to speak it because we have a right to have our own choices in accordance with our Constitution and our laws. And so too, the people of Dominica. I come here to give greetings, the Cultural and Linguistic Gala. I have given it. Thank you very much. God bless you.